A couple of years ago, when I was in college, I was in a terrible car accident where a drunk truck driver crashed into my car. I ended up in the hospital for several weeks, broke my arm, and it took me a very long time to learn how to walk again. It also took a long time for all the scars to go away. My parents abandoned me for my sister's birth and blamed me, now that the truth is out and their perfect image is shattered. Oh, one thing I do remember from that time is that my family had refused to come to my aid because my sister had gone into labor. Fun fact, I was actually going to surprise my sister by driving to the hospital where she was going to give birth when I ended up in that car accident. Even though it has been almost 3 years since the accident, I still drive extra carefully, even though it wasn't my fault. I was only a few hours away from my hometown, and my college campus was close to it, so it was easy for me to travel back and forth. When I received a call from my parents informing me that my sister had gone into labor and they were taking her to the hospital, I decided to surprise her by using a friend's car to get there, but I had an accident on the way and had to be taken to the closest hospital, which was mostly my fault. What I did not like was that even a few days after my sister gave birth, my parents did not bother to come check on me. I called them multiple times after my accident, despite the fact that it was extremely painful for me to do so, and that I was slipping in and out of consciousness quite frequently. Friends were there for me during that time because my parents were too busy with my sister, and I completely understood that. My parents finally called me about a week after my accident, but it wasn't to check on me. Rather, they wanted to know why I had been calling so much because they had been ignoring one of my calls since they had been with my sister and her baby. I was shocked by how cold they were being with me, especially considering the circumstances, but I still made the decision to ask. I kept asking if my parents had called or if they had shown up, and I was disappointed each time. They asked how I was and how my sister and the baby were doing. They said that my sister and my niece were both doing well. They didn't ask me how I was, even though I was fairly certain that they had discovered that I had been in an accident by that point, because my friends had informed me that they had texted my parents on every platform imaginable. Since they didn't ask, I chose to tell them myself that I had been in an accident and that I had been attempting to reach out to them for the past few days to tell them about it. At that point, I hoped for a response, but all they said was that they were aware that I had been in an accident and that my friends had contacted them to tell them about it. They didn't even bother to say anything about it. I became very irate and asked them if they couldn't even be bothered to act like they cared about me. At which point they said they hadn't returned my phone calls and texts on purpose because they didn't want to talk to me, because they felt that helping my sister give birth was more important than helping me because of an accident I caused. I couldn't understand what they were talking about because, as far as I knew, the truck driver was at fault, and I wasn't the one who had been intoxicated. But they told me that wasn't what they were talking about. When I told them that I was actually going to drive to the hospital so I could be there. For my sister, they told me that it was still quite unnecessary for me to do something like that, and that I had no one to blame for the accident but myself. They said that I had caused the accident myself by choosing to drive alone, and that it was really irresponsible of me because it had been quite late at night and I had no reason to go out on a drive. It was really awful and inconsiderate of them to say that to me, and I became so agitated that I ended the call without saying anything more. Later, I learned that when the people who had found me at the scene of the accident called 911, my parents had been called first, but they had refused to come and had even asked not to be contacted about this again. Then, because I had my ID on me at the time, the college authorities had been called, and that's how my parents had been called by emergency services to report that their daughter had been in an accident, but they had not bothered to show up, and their only response to the whole situation was to blame me for what happened, even though I was only trying to be there for my sister and the family. After that incident, I realized that even though I had wanted to be there for my family, my friends found out, which made it even more disappointing for me. My family had no interest in supporting me at all, because even my sister had not bothered to get in touch with me after that. I haven't spoken to my family in 3 years, because I gave up on them after that incident. Before that, we had a normal relationship, but I always felt like my sister and her priorities would always take precedence over me. And after my accident, my family made it clear to me that I wasn't upset that they hadn't left me when my sister went into labor and didn't come to see me, but I was upset that they didn't think it was necessary to come see me even after she had given birth. I didn't even expect my sister to come to see me in the hospital because, at the time, it was obviously impossible for her, but it wasn't impossible for my parents. And my sister had her fiancé and her in-laws to look after her. I only had my friends. But I was fortunate to have friends who supported me throughout my recovery, even covering the costs of my treatment and other bills. Although I'm still paying them back, I'm incredibly appreciative of everything they did for me. And even though the incident happened 3 years ago, I don't think I'll ever be able to fully repay them. I guess we had an unwritten agreement that we couldn't discuss this with anyone else in the family, and I had complied up until this point. However, they recently decided to talk about it, and one of my aunts contacted me after discussing the incident. Many members of the family have asked why we are no longer together, but I have had the decency to keep it all to myself. My estrangement from them was brought up during a family dinner my parents hosted a few weeks ago for a few people to celebrate my sister's promotion at work. While everyone was together, the subject of my estrangement from them came up, and after much back and forth, my parents finally decided to discuss it after 3 years, because they did not feel that they needed to keep it a secret from the public. Family no longer, but while telling the story, they altered some facts about what happened after my accident. For example, I had planned to surprise my sister by driving to the hospital, and I had been in a car accident on the way there. However, they later claimed that they had not been contacted, and that they only learned about the accident a few days after it happened, meaning that a couple of years ago, when I was in college, I was in a terrible car accident where a drunk truck driver crashed into my car. I ended up in the hospital for several weeks, broke my arm, and it took me a very long time to learn how to walk again. It also took a long time for all the scars to go away. My parents abandoned me for my sister's birth and blamed me, now that the truth is out and their perfect image is shattered. Oh, one thing I do remember from that time is that my family had refused to come to my aid because my sister had gone into labor. Fun fact. In essence, they portrayed the entire situation as a misunderstanding and made me appear to be the bad guy who had been totally unforgiving of them for their lack of concern. My aunt, being the good Samaritan that she is, chose to get in touch with me despite my parents' explicit instructions not to do so because they did not want to make a big deal out of this. However, my aunt contacted me and informed me that 3 years had gone by since I had spoken to my parents, and they truly missed me. I was losing out on the chance to be an aunt to my niece, and she knew that she wouldn't miss out on an opportunity to be an aunt to my niece, even though I knew that the true reason they didn't want anyone talking to me about what they had told them was because they didn't want me to discover that they had been lying about what actually happened back then. Opportunity like that, so she would advise me to get in touch with my parents again. I was very perplexed, so I called her, and she informed me that she knew the true reason I hadn't spoken to my family for so long. She also told me what my parents had told them, and I was shocked because they had made themselves the victim and portrayed me as the selfish bad guy when it had been the other way around. I decided to talk to my aunt and tell her the truth because I was furious when I heard what they had told everyone in the family about what had happened all those years ago. I also told her that if she didn't want to believe me, I was willing to connect her with my friends who had paid for all of my expenses. What I was telling her was the truth, and it was my parents who didn't give a damn about me on my behalf. I wasn't angry with them because they had decided to be there for my sister because she was giving birth, which was also very important. But even after that, when they didn't bother to show up for me, I became upset. My aunt seemed pretty shocked and apologized to me for doubting me, but I was grateful that she had made the decision. Accident, they had been contacted, but they just didn't want to be bothered at the time. I suppose the news of what actually happened all those years ago began to spread after my talk with my aunt, because many people began contacting me to tell me that what I did by telling my aunt the truth was necessary, because otherwise, my parents might have gotten away with lying about what had happened and making me the bad guy in the story, to speak with me, because otherwise, I probably would not have discovered what my parents were saying behind my back. I am really grateful to my aunt, because she convinced people to listen to her and believe my side of the story. Otherwise, my parents would have gotten away with it. However, the situation has become somewhat problematic for me at the moment because many family members even began to sympathize with me, telling me that what had happened to me was truly terrible and that my parents should never have treated me like that. It was unfair and undeserved in a way. The rest of the family began to turn away from my parents after they learned that I had told my aunt about my son, and she had told others about it. I don't understand how any of this is my fault, because all I did was tell people the truth. In fact, it would be inaccurate to say that I told people the truth. I only told my aunt the truth, and she made the decision to tell everyone else anyhow, blaming me for the current state of affairs, because at the moment, no one in the family wants to talk to them, and they have all essentially been avoiding them which is unfortunate because in a few weeks she will celebrate her daughter's 3rd birthday, which also happens to be the 3rd anniversary of my accident. However, their current concern is that now that they know the truth, they believe I'm not going to be attending their birthday, which will be quite disappointing because my niece is looking forward to her birthday celebration and the whole family has been invited. However, no one has replied to the invitations yet, and some people have already declined without bothering to provide an explanation. This is what's happening at the moment, and despite the fact that my family hasn't spoken to me in 3 years, this has prompted them to contact me, been phoning and texting me nonstop. I haven't answered any of their calls because I don't think it matters. But the majority of their messages accuse me of fabricating the situation to steal my sister's attention. It seems that my parents, and even my sister, think I'm doing this on purpose because they couldn't stand the fact that they chose to be with my sister during her delivery rather than with me. They even went so far as to say that they were certain I had intentionally entered the car late that night in order to gain attention, particularly because I was envious of my sister because she was giving birth and receiving all the attention from the family, which I wanted for myself. It's such a terrible, nasty thing to say, and I can't even imagine thinking that way about someone. Otherwise, no matter how much I despise them, the suggestion that I intentionally caused that accident in order to gain sympathy and attention from my family was just repulsive. In addition, they were accusing me of attention-seeking even at this very moment, because they knew that I had discovered that my sister had been promoted at work and was doing well in her life. I couldn't stand it, so I made the extra effort to bring up things from the past and paint them in a negative light. I don't even understand why they would say that when they realized that I was doing exactly what they were accusing me of, and the hypocrisy of it infuriated me. I had continued to block their numbers and ignore all of their messages since they began attempting to get in touch with me. But a few days ago, my parents made the decision to physically visit my house and inform me that I had to talk to my aunt and the rest of the family to explain that everything I had said was a lie to make my parents look bad. When they arrived, demanding that I do this for them, as if they were entitled to my assistance after everything they had done, I had to correct the situation I had created because my niece's birthday was coming up in a few days, and they could not let that disappoint her. When they arrived and began yelling outside my house, I clearly refused to let them in, and when I threatened to call the police if they did not leave, I told them that I had no interest in entertaining any of their nonsense requests, saying that whatever they were asking of me was way too much, considering what they had done for me, which was nothing at all. That's when I really lost my temper, and I may have even been the a-hole. My dad told me that he was not afraid, because he knew that I was just an attention seeker, and that's why I had gone out of my way to ruin their reputation. Now that I was trying to get back at my sister and her daughter in a petty way, he was not going to let this happen. So I had to open the door and tell them that they needed to leave. I even had my phone in my hand with the number dial. I should have used that phone to call my family and tell them the truth about what happened, even though I was telling them the truth. However, they wanted me to tell them their version of events, which was that I was the villain and the saints, and they wanted me to tell people that I had been lying. They would not stop yelling at me. So I lost my temper and began pushing them off my property. At first, they were just shocked that I had agreed to get physical, but they began to retaliate. By that point, I was so furious that I lost control, and I continued pushing them until they were outside. While they were there, I continued pushing them and screaming at them, saying that I hoped that a car would drive by and run them over so that no one would come to the hospital to see them, and perhaps then they would be able to experience what I had all those years ago, when they left me after my accident, because they seemed shocked by my outburst. So after I finished yelling at them, I went back inside and ignored them. Fortunately, they didn't bother me again. But later, my sister called to tell me that what I had done was excessive, and that if I was so upset about the cops showing up, I should have just called them or opened the door, traumatized my parents. And she believes that I should apologize to them. I felt terrible about how I handled the situation so violently, because that's not me at all. However, I'll tell you why it's such a big deal for me to shove my parents when they showed up at my house after 3 years of no contact. It's not just that it was a violent and physical outburst, it's also because I am a trained my sister. Claims that I even bruised them, but that may have been an exaggeration on her part to make me feel sorry for them anyhow. I'm a mixed martial arts fighter, and while I'm by no means professional, I'm still much stronger than both of my parents. So it was obviously traumatizing for them for me to be getting physical with them. It feels wrong for her to be threatening me in that way, especially when she knows for sure that what I said was true. But I have also been standing my ground, and I have told my sister that if I don't publicly acknowledge what I did and tell everyone in the family that I had been lying about what I had said, she will file charges. I'm not sure if I owe them an apology at this time, but she is fairly certain that I do. It has been 2 days since I posted here, and after reading the comments and other material, I have decided not to apologize to my parents. And I've also decided not to contact my sister if she attempts to contact me again, because it is obvious that she is just as bad as them. That way, if I do end up apologizing, it will be because I genuinely feel sorry, and not because I'm afraid of what she believes will happen to me after she presses charges. Update 1. She had been nice to me when we were kids, which was the only reason I hadn't been against her yet. However, I'm pretty sure she has changed now. Thank you so much to everyone who left a comment on my post and shared their thoughts about the situation. It means a lot to me. However, at this point, I'm afraid that I don't think that apologizing to my parents will set the right example. They will likely believe that they can intimidate me into shutting up. If my sister decides to file charges, I will simply state that I was provoked, and I'm fairly certain that even the punishment for pushing my parents won't be very severe. Because they can't just get away with everything and expect me to put up with their behavior. They were the ones who showed up at my door, started threatening me, and wouldn't leave even after I told them that I didn't want to interact with them. I'm mentally prepared for everything because it's not like they get serious injuries, and I was just trying to get them off my property. However, I will never apologize to anyone because I'm not sorry at all. That concludes update 2. Apparently, today was supposed to be the day that my sister had that big birthday party for her daughter, but nobody showed up. I know that for sure because I talked to my aunt, and she told me that after hearing what had happened to me all those years ago, everyone in the family actually chose not to attend the party. This wasn't even because they had refused to be there. For me, when I had my accident 3 years ago, rather, it was because they had chosen to lie about what had actually happened in order to make themselves look good and paint me as the bad guy, which was unacceptable to everyone in the family. And I'm really happy that people made the right decision. I became very emotional when talking to my aunt, because she told me that if anyone else had known about my accident, they would have come to my aid, but I had made the decision to keep everything private. In fact, I had deleted all of my social media accounts at the time, and even when people tried to contact me to talk, I only replied that I was okay. I had been in a terrible accident 3 years ago, and many people were unaware of it. It was a very dark chapter in my life, not only physically, but also emotionally, because of what I've been through. I don't really want to relive it, but I can't ignore the past either. So I ended up crying as I talked to my aunt about what had happened all those years ago, and I was finally able to let all the emotions out, because I'd been suppressing it for nearly 3 years now. But she was really supportive of me and told me that everyone in the family thinks I'm really strong for going through that alone. She also told me that I know who to call in the future if anything goes wrong, and I'm really thankful that I spoke with her and that she bothered to support me over the past few weeks. Now that no one came to the party, I know that my sister and since my niece is only 3 years old, it's unlikely that she will remember this in a few years. So I'm just preparing myself for the reaction. To be honest, the only person I feel bad for in this situation is my niece. I've never met her or interacted with her, but I know that having no one show up on your birthday cannot be easy. I'm sure that her parents will do something to make it up to her. It's been a week since I last posted an update, and a few things have happened since then. The first and most important thing is that my parents have contacted me. I had blocked them everywhere, so they decided to create a new email account so they could communicate with me again. They said they don't regret how they treated me 3 years ago, but to be honest, they were all very stressed out at the time. It was heartwarming that they were finally admitting their error. But at this point, it doesn't really matter, because what has been done is already done. The damage is done. And they are too preoccupied with my sister's delivery to pay attention to what I was going through. In hindsight, however, they do agree that they should have at least bothered to come and visit me. And take it back. If they had sent me this email a few months after the accident, it might have been easier for me to handle this. But they waited 3 whole years. And a lot of confrontation before admitting that they were negligent and wrong. By now, I've clearly realized that their sister comes before me, and I'm okay with that. I've made peace with everything, so their apology means nothing to me. The second thing that, after we worked things out in that email, They said that they had spoken to my sister and that they had all agreed not to file charges against me for the other day. That was good for them, but I suppose it wouldn't have mattered to me even if they had. I replied that everything was fine and that I didn't want them to get in touch with me anymore, and they posted a statement on social media stating that I suppose they simply wanted people to stop criticizing them for their past, which is why they made that statement. Otherwise, they wouldn't have even acknowledged it. The rest of the family demonstrated to them that they were serious about not agreeing with them and that they were fine with whatever they had done up to this point. Therefore, they would appreciate it if the rest of the family stayed out of this feud or whatever now that it was over. They had made the decision to take it seriously after missing the birthday celebration, but they still had to be the victim, which is why they made a comment. In such a manner. In any case, I'm really delighted that this is over, and I may resume my regular life now.